Okay, I want to welcome you to the webinar. It's called 7 Insights for Successful Small Group Launches. And my name is Alan White. I have been a pastor for over 25 years. I served a church in California, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. I also served a church here in South Carolina. I'm originally from Kansas, but that's how I ended up in South Carolina. My wife and I have been married just over 16 years. And we have 4 kids, a boy 14, a boy 10, a girl 9, and a little boy who is 2, and he's a lot of fun. I have coached over 1,500 churches over the last 11 years. And since 2011, in the last 5 years, I've helped churches start over 14,000 groups. And last year, I worked with 18 churches, and those 18 churches together started right around 5,000 groups. So that's not people in groups. That's actually groups. So what I do, I work with churches individually. I work with churches through coaching groups. I've developed some online courses. I have a book that's coming out in January, I just mentioned. And also, I blog over at alanwhite.org, and at 10:30 Eastern Time every Tuesday morning, you'll see a new post from me. You can also follow me on Twitter at Alan White or Facebook.com/Alan White Consulting. Well, at the risk of some of you hearing a repeat of my story, I like to start a little bit with my journey with groups and launching groups and give you a little bit of context about who I am and what I've experienced, and then we'll talk to you about the 7 insights. So if you'll forgive a little story, then we'll go from there. All right. I graduated from seminary in 1990 and ended up at a church in Northern California in the Central Valley near Modesto called New Life Christian Center. When I arrived there, it was a church of about 300 adults, and got there about a year and a half into it. Our founding pastor had to resign, and all of the staff left except for me, and all of our adults left except for 85 of them. And things were not looking good at that point. Our new pastor came in the very last Sunday of 1992. He was 30 years old. I was 28, and to say that we were green was definitely an understatement. But the very first thing that we did in 1993 is he took me down to Southern California to hear this guy I had never heard of, Rick Warren, talk about the purpose-driven church. And, we got all excited, all filled with vision about what our church could be. And then we just thought, scratched our heads and said, how in the world are we going to pull this off with 85 people? But we began to build a little bit at a time, and our church didn't grow dramatically. We grew by about 100 people a year, which is still not bad. And I served this church for 15 years as the associate pastor. I've been away from it for about 10 years now. They're about 30. They were 1,500 when I left, about 3,200 now, and building a new building and all of that fun stuff. So one of the things we realized as the church began to grow was actually a principle that we learned from Rick Warren, which was that a church needs to grow larger and smaller at the same time. And so we knew that, we needed to reach the community, so the church was going to grow larger. But then also we knew once we started doing that, then that people would get kind of lost in the crowd. And so everybody couldn't know everybody, but everybody needed to know somebody. And so this was the importance of small groups. So I started out with my 5-year plan for small groups. And, we were started out, I recruited 10 leaders. We were going to have 10 groups. They were all going to develop an apprentice leader. We would train the apprentice. The apprentice would start a new group after the first year. We would recruit some more, and, everything was going to be up and to the right and be awesome. And that's not exactly how it worked out. Most of my leaders couldn't find an apprentice. I think one of them actually trained an apprentice and started a new group, but there were a lot of ups and downs to the thing. In some years we launched 10 groups, in some years we launched 2 groups, in some years we launched no groups. And so finally when we got to a place where we were 7 years into the 5-year plan, we were stuck. And it was about this time I met a guy who had been the small group pastor at Saddleback Church. His name is Brett Eastman, and he had a ministry called Life Together. And I went down to a meeting that he was doing at Mariners Church in Orange County, and he was talking about how you could multiply groups without dividing them, and how new people did better in new groups, and things you could do with church-wide campaigns, but not just buying Saddleback's campaigns, but producing your own campaign. And I was intrigued by all of this. I wasn't exactly sure that it was going to work, but I was intrigued by this. So on my drive home, it was about 350 miles home, I began to think about what was my pastor's vision for groups? What was the thing that was currently on his heart? What was the thing that he was excited about? Now, by this time, this is 2004, and what my pastor was excited about was the Passion of the Christ. He'd already planned a sermon series to coincide with the release of the movie, because he knew once people saw the movie that they would have spiritual questions. And so he planned the sermon series. He planned a little bit of advertising. So when I got back, I walked into his office and I said, Pastor Dave, what do you think about launching groups along with the Passion of the Christ? And he said, I think that's a great idea. Now, I didn't have a new idea. I just kind of piggybacked on his idea. And so we shot our own curriculum. It wasn't high tech. It was my home video camera, and we shot it in the auditorium because that was our best lighting, and put a couple ficus trees behind him. But we got it done. And we output it to VHS tape, because this is back when we still had VHS tape, and we decided to do this 3 weeks before the series started. So we couldn't do all 6 and have them all ready to go. We were actually 1 week ahead of what the groups were doing. And so every week in my office, the group leaders would bring in last week's tape, and I would give them this week's tape, and then I would take last week's tape to the duplicator, and that would become next week's tape. And as crazy as that was, here was the thing. When my pastor stood up on a Sunday morning and he said, we prepared these materials for you for this Passion series, and if you would open up your home, we will help you get your group started. And we doubled our groups in a day. Now, bear in mind, it had taken 7 years to get 30% of our adults connected into groups, and then we doubled our groups in a day. 6 months later, we were actually at a place where we had 125% of our average adult attendance connected into groups. Now, that's not funny pastor math. I mean, part of it is that not everybody attends every Sunday, but they were a regular part of the group. And then the other thing that we began to experience was people would meet with coworkers in a break room at work, or they would meet with friends at a coffee shop, or one group even met on a commuter train and did the study every morning on the way to work from Stockton, California to San Jose. And so we really began to see people become very creative with how they could do groups. I remember one gal walked up to the table and she said, I have 3 friends we meet every Thursday morning at Starbucks. Could we be a group? And I said, well, of course you could be a group, and gave them materials, and they started a group at Starbucks. Like I said before, I was at this church for 15 years, and then I moved to South Carolina and served at Brookwood Church, which is a church of about 6,500. They already had a pretty good small group system started, but again, we produced some curriculum and had senior pastor stand out, recruit people into groups, and started hundreds and hundreds of groups at a time, and had a pretty good run there. I think we only got to 78%, but I was only there 4 years. If I'd stayed, a little longer, maybe we would have gotten more. A few churches that I have have the privilege of helping over the years. One was Van Dyke Church down in Lutz, Florida, north of Tampa, great United Methodist church. And when I met them about 5 years ago, they were a church of about 1,800 adults, and they had 400 adults in groups. And so we coached them on how to create their own curriculum, and they produced their first one for the fall of 2011, and they went from having 400 adults in groups to having 1,000 adults in groups. They turned around, they did the same thing for the new year, and launched another series, and went from 1,000 adults in groups to 1,600 in groups. And then we did a third one. And this sounds like a lot, but you would never have to do this for more than 1 year. So launched the series after Easter and went from 1,600 adults to having over 2,000 adults in groups in a church of 1,800 people, and have seen some really remarkable results from a lot of churches. We'll talk about a few others later. So let's get to these insights. Now, one thing I will tell you as we get into this is I will make a copy of the PowerPoint slides available to you after the webinar. So feel like, you can take the notes that you want to take, but don't feel like you have to write everything down, because I am going to send it to you. So our 7 insights. Insight number 1 is to choose the right topic. Over the years, I've worked with churches that we said, well, what's going to be your topic for your launch, for groups, for your church-wide series? And some of them said, well, one church said, well, we're going to do a series on fasting to begin the year. And I thought, oh man, that's going to be a hard one to get people signed up for. The refreshments are going to be really easy. But other than that, I don't know that you're going to be inviting friends and neighbors and coworkers to a series on fasting. Another church said they were going to do a series on tithing. And, I thought, that's kind of a mature topic. Now, I believe in tithing. I have tithed all of my adult life. God has blessed me because of that. If you have a different position on that, you're entitled to that. But again, something very difficult to get people connected into small groups, especially, giving in general, finances, capital campaigns. Don't ever launch small groups with a capital campaign. And if you need to talk about that offline, we will. One church said, we're going to do a evangelism series. And I thought, oh man, evangelism, that's going to be tough. And I actually convinced them, instead of doing a series to train their people in evangelism, we actually did a series where we made the series evangelistic, so that it was something that appealed to their friends and neighbors that they could invite them to, and then we presented the gospel in the series. Now, there are some great series that have been around over the years. Series like, of course, Rick Warren's 40 Days of Purpose. That was a pretty big one. Carrie Shook did one called 1 Month to Live. A few years ago, helped Gene Apple create a curriculum called Hope Rising. Just want you to look at some of these titles and think about the appeal that they would have, not only to the church body, but also in the community. Hand-me-downs about leaving a legacy, family matters, kinds of relationship series, kinds of felt need kinds of series, might be topics that you would want to pursue, or even going back and looking at popular series that your pastor has preached, in the past, so that you don't have to come up with all brand new content, because pastors that have been around for any length of time, they have content. And there are also some great campaigns that are available online. In fact, I believe Mark Howell has a list on his website of 70 some campaigns that you can purchase and use in your church. So the right topic will help your church reach your community. Now here's insight number 2. Insight number 2 is this: you want to lower the bar on leadership. Some churches require a lot for a person to be a group leader. And maybe you should require a lot to be a group leader. But what are your requirements? What are you wanting people to have in order to lead? Should they be seminary grads? Should they be the next Billy Graham? Should they be the next Mother Teresa? Should they be, Jesus Jr.? We may be setting our standards a little too high if that's the case. And we really have to think about what our goal is. Are we inviting somebody to be a permanent, ongoing leader? Or are we inviting somebody to try doing groups for 6 weeks? And that's the commitment. And maybe they gather their friends. Maybe they're not advertised. I like this quote from Neil Cole. He said this: we need to lower the bar on what it means to be a leader and raise the bar on what it means to be a disciple, because we are all called to go and make disciples. And so maybe it's a little more informal. Maybe they're groups that aren't advertised, but give people an opportunity, because the reality is, what I found in recruiting leaders, I handpicked leaders for a lot of years. And there were a lot of people that I overlooked simply because I didn't see leadership potential necessarily in them. But once we started allowing people to lead a group for a short-term experience, once I actually saw people lead, not only did it become clear to me that they were leaders, it also became clear to them that they were leaders, because they had never regarded themselves as being a leader before. So what are we asking people to do? Worked a few years ago with Dr. Tony Evans at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, and one day I was meeting with his leadership team, and we had this question about leadership, because they had a very high standard of leadership in their church. They had 175 groups that were currently going, and it was kind of an arduous process in order to become a leader. I think there was even, I want to say, a year of leadership training. And so I was on a call with their team one day, and they said, you know, we were talking to some of our current leaders and some of our established leaders, and they were saying if we open this up for people to host groups and they can invite their friends and they can self-select, anybody can, you know, be a leader or lead a group for 6 weeks that wants to lead a group, we're thinking that we're going to run into maybe a lot of problems with this. And I could understand, you know, the concerns of these experienced leaders. I also knew that part of what they were saying was, you know, we paid our dues and now you're just going to let anybody in? And I didn't quite know how to answer them. And so I said a quick prayer, and the words that came to mind, which I believe were words from the Lord, I said, you know, this isn't a call to leadership. This is a call to obedience, because we are all called to go and make disciples. And going and making disciples in this context wasn't knocking on doors. It wasn't handing out tracts, even though if people have, you know, with gifts of evangelism, those would be things they would get very excited about. This was inviting people into a group for a short-term experience to do a study based on the pastor's teaching. And in that, they were helping to grow people. People were being introduced to Christ. And we actually got across that. Long story short is Dr. Evans, over a 3-week period, recruited leaders on every Sunday morning and ended up recruiting about 500 leaders in their church. So an easier entry point will help people self-select as leaders for 6 weeks. And then based on that 6-week experience, they'll determine on whether they want to continue, and also you can determine whether you want them to continue. But, you know, I call these series groups. These aren't your, whether you call them small groups or life groups, whatever term that you use, these aren't your permanent ongoing groups. These are kind of temporary groups for the length of a series, and then you evaluate how it went and then offer more training and offer, you know, a leadership pathway toward becoming an officially recognized group in your church. The third insight is this: to focus on recruiting group leaders. Focus on recruiting group leaders. So here's a little quiz, and you don't have to take the quiz. I'm actually going to answer it for you. But if your senior pastor gave you airtime, so I mean your senior pastor is going to say something about groups on Sunday morning, who should you recruit? Should you recruit people who want to join groups? Should you recruit people who will lead groups? Should you recruit people who will give you a lot of money? Or should you recruit people who want to join a traditional class or a Bible study? And in my book, there is only one right answer to this question. So think about this. If you recruit a bunch of people who are interested in groups, you may or may not end up with groups. If you recruit people to a traditional class or a Bible study, I mean, let's face it, in most churches, these are declining ministry models. And even if you promote them more, it doesn't mean that they're going to continue on. But let me caution you here, is if your traditional classes, Sunday school classes and Bible studies are meeting a need, let them meet that need. You don't need to close these down if they're serving a need. But the question is, if they're not serving everybody's need, what can you offer? So when your pastor says, I'm going to give you a couple of Sundays to promote groups in your church, what should you ask for? You should ask your pastor to recruit leaders and nothing else. Because if you're recruiting leaders, people will get the idea that something's going on. And if you're recruiting leaders, that there will be groups, and then, you know, we'll figure out ways to get them into groups. But you want to use that energy, that interest from your senior pastor to recruit leaders. You don't want to, I'm not going to say waste, but you want to use that opportunity to get as many leaders as you can, because if you have a leader, you will have a group. If you have a bunch of people interested in groups, you may not. Now, this is where we usually say, but what if people can't find a group? Or what if people are new? Or what if they need a group every Tuesday night in the 29860 zip code that meets at midnight? Or what if they have no friends? Let me tell you this. Let the exceptions be the exceptions. I'm a huge advocate of forming groups by having the leader invite some people. Have the leader's spouse invite some people. Have the people that they invited invite some people. And yes, there are people that are new to your church. And yes, there are people new to your community who may not know anybody else and may not get invited to a group. We'll figure out some other ways that we can give them an opportunity to get connected into groups. But we don't have to create an entire program based on the person who needs a Tuesday night group in a certain zip code that meets at midnight. That's an exception, and you want to let the exceptions be the exceptions. So you want to focus on recruiting leaders because members will find their way, and if there are a handful that can't, then you can help a handful, but you don't need to help hundreds. All right, insight number 4 is this. Keep the invitation and the response close together. And what I mean is when your pastor is making an appeal, inviting people to open up their homes, inviting people to gather their friends and to do a study, you want to keep that invitation and the way that they respond as close as possible. Here are a couple of things. Distance will kill your response. If you tell them after the service, go out into the lobby and sign up at the information desk. Now that doesn't seem to be too complicated, but here's the thing. One of the largest churches in the United States gave those exact instructions to their prospective new leaders. And it's a church of 12,000 adults on the weekend. And on their Saturday night service, they invited people to fill out a card in the service, take it to the information desk, and sign up. And they had 18 people register to lead a group. In a church of 12,000 adults, they had 18 people register to lead a group. Now, we fixed it, and I'll tell you about the fix in a minute. The other thing is, while it's very efficient to have people sign up online, if they won't sign up by walking out of the auditorium to an information desk, how likely are they going to leave church, go get their kids, go to lunch, drive home, get their computer out, and sign up online? That's worse than the information desk. And so you want to keep the invitation and the response as close together as you possibly can. So for instance, in the service, you say, okay, there's a card in your bulletin, or we handed out a card. And if you don't use cards, I have an alternative for you in a minute here. So get this card out, and if you would be interested in opening up your home to host a group, if you would be interested in gathering a group of friends, fill this card out and place it in the offering as it comes by. So now they filled out a registration card in the service, and it's been collected in the service. And this is the most effective way to do this, is to capture the response in the service with the pastor's direction as to what they should do to respond. Now, the church of 12,000 that only had 18 new leaders that walked out to the information center to sign up, well, in their Sunday services, they had 3 services on Sunday. By the end of the weekend, 258 people had registered. So they went from 18 signing up at the desk to 258 signing up in the service. And by the end of 3 weeks of recruiting across all of their campuses, they had 1,100 new groups sign up for their series. Now, I have worked with a few churches, and they said, you know, this registration card is a really great idea, except we don't give our people a bulletin. We don't have pens or pencils in the rows. So there would be nothing for them to write with even if we did hand out a card. What do? Well, you can actually get a number and have them text from their cell phone to that number if they are interested in having a group. You can also use an online survey tool. So get out your smartphone, they text something, we send them a link, they fill out a 3-question survey. You just need their name, their email address, their cell phone number, which you would have that. But their name, their email address, their phone number, and then which briefing they would come to, and then you will contact them afterwards. So one of those two ways, but you want to keep the invitation and the response as close together. Don't take any chances in collecting the response. So you want to collect it in the service while they're in church, because I've been convinced after all of these years of ministry that most people think about church when they're at church. And once they leave those doors, once they start heading toward that parking lot, their thoughts have gone somewhere completely different. So you want to get that response right there. Insight number 5 is you want to shorten the distance between when they say yes and when they start the group. So you don't want to create a long path. Don't burn people out before they start. See, I used to recruit people to lead groups. Then they went through 6 weeks of my training. And then if they decided to go ahead and do a group, which some of them said no after my training, they decided to do a group, then we would work on putting a group together, and then we would get them a coach, and then eventually they would get started, and it became a long process. Some people's process is much longer than that. And the longer it took to get them going with the group, the more opportunity we had for fall off. So especially for these short-term groups, I try to keep this as simple as possible. You want to give them some kind of basic training. And my basic training tends to consist of what the series is about, when and where they're going to meet, that sort of thing, how to connect, how to get their group going, and then I introduce them to their coach. And I can do all of that in about 10 or 15 minutes. And we do it right after the service. And as soon as they've gone through that briefing, then they go ahead and start inviting people to their group right then and get it going. So you definitely want them to work with a coach. And if you don't have an elaborate coaching structure, it's fine. If you don't have a coaching structure, don't feel guilty about that. Because if you have leaders, your experienced leaders would have the ability to coach some of these brand new leaders the first time out doing a 6-week study. You want them to start inviting people. I mean, from the Sunday, my pastor in California, one Sunday morning, he says to the congregation, he said, I want everybody to turn on their cell phones. And I thought, oh man, he's lost his marbles. Why is he having everybody turn on their cell phones in church? He said, I want you to look at your speed dial on your cell phone. He said, these are the people that you're in the contact with the most frequently. He said, if they live nearby, if they live somewhere in town, then after the service, I want you to call them and invite them to become part of your group. And then he had them turn their cell phones off and put them away. But you want people to start, I mean, on the way home, think of the first 2 people you would invite and call them. Then you want them to start the group. You don't want to waste a lot of time just right through. Now, if you're advertising these groups to the congregation, you're putting them on the website, you're listing them in the bulletin, you're doing anything to advertise them or to send people to those groups, you're probably going to need to do some kind of an interview and get to know them a little bit better. Because if they're in the bulletin, they're on the website, you're sending somebody to the group, there's going to be a certain expectation. There's going to be a sense of, well, this is an official group of the church. Well, like I said, if they're unofficial, they're not advertised, then anybody can lead, gather your friends, have fun. We're going to help you. We're going to train you. We're going to support you. But if they're advertised, that is a little bit of a different category. So you need to make sure that people, you know who you're sending people to. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they said that somebody had signed up for a group, and they went to the address, had never met the person that was leading the group before, and the house was kind of dark, and they were just a little unsure about even going up to the door. So you kind of need to know that if you're going to advertise or send people to the group. So again, you want to start groups immediately. There really is no reason to delay. Now, the other thing with starting groups, and this is insight number 6, is that you want to recruit for an entire month prior to your launch. You don't want to recruit for 3 months. I mean, 3 months out, you could give them a heads up, kind of a save the date. Here's our fall campaign that's going to start on September the 18th. And so would you mark this date on your calendar? I mean, you can even say that now before people have left for summer. But when you get closer to that, within that month prior is when you want people to sign up for groups. Because if you sign them up now to lead a group in the fall, they just have, 4 months to get cold feet. And we don't want them to do that. Plus, I went from a PTA president. She said, You promote well in advance, but you sign up for 3 weeks. Because if you had offered signups for 3 months, everybody signs up during the last 3 weeks. So you promote it so that they know the series is coming, they know there's an opportunity with groups, and then you sign them up during the 3 weeks prior. So why would you recruit for a month? Well, first of all, you want to meet with your current group leaders first and give them a heads up as to what's going on. And I even go so far as to say, I give like a church-wide series, I give that as an option to my current leaders because they may already have plans for their group. Or you may have certain types of group that are in a certain pattern of study and it wouldn't work for them. And so I meet with those leaders first and give them a heads up. And the other thing too is some people, if you make it mandatory, they just dig in and refuse to do it simply because you made it mandatory. And so I don't want to put up with that kind of nonsense. So I just invite them. If you're interested in this, sign up. If you're not interested, we're okay. The other thing that I'll do is if you meet with your current leaders first, it's going to take some pressure off of your briefing because you want to have all of these new leaders crowded, or all the established leaders crowding into the briefing. You'll only have new leaders at the briefing. The other thing is that not everyone attends every Sunday. So if you only recruit for a week, then you may have missed 2/3 of your congregation. In fact, the national average is that a person attends 1.6 times a month. So if you recruit once or twice, you may have missed the 2 times that they're going to be there. The other thing is that people may need more than 1 week to decide. So the first week you say, you can open up your home, we prepared this series if you are interested in doing this or whatever, and then they go, you've kind of caught them flat-footed. And they may not be able to make a decision about that. It may be just too much all at once, but then when they come back the next week and you're talking about it, then they've had a week to think about it, or in the third week they've had 2 weeks to think about it, and they may be more likely to sign up for the group. So let me tell you about 2 churches I've worked with. One church was in New York City. They recruited groups for 1 week. They had 20 new groups, and they were disappointed that they only had 20 new groups. The other church was a church in Florida, and they recruited for 3 weeks, and at the end of 3 weeks they had 60 new groups, and they were overjoyed. Now here's the kicker. When the New York church, the small group pastor of the New York church said, why did they have 3 times as many groups? I said, well, here's the deal. On their first Sunday in recruiting in Florida, they had 20 new groups, just like the guy in New York had 20 new groups. But because they recruited 3 weeks in a row, they ended up with 60, and the New York church only ended up with 20. Now, we can celebrate the fact that there were 80 new groups between these 2 churches, but that is part of the reason that you want to recruit for multiple weeks in a row leading up to a series. You would catch more people that way, and you also give them time to make a decision or to think through whether or not they want to lead a group. All right, insight number 7 is your senior pastor must be your church's small group champion. I've been an associate pastor for most of my 25 years in ministry. And what I know is that if I stood up and said the exact same words that my senior pastor said, I would get 30% the result. And you know how I know that? Because for 7 years, I promoted small groups and I recruited leaders and I connected people into groups, and I had 30% of my adults in groups. And the first time my senior pastor did it, we doubled our groups in 1 day, and then we went to 125% of our adult attendance within 6 months. And I'll tell you the reality of this. I have not recruited a small group leader myself since 2004. And I served several more years at the church in California. And then I served 4 years at the church here in Greenville. And I have not recruited a single small group leader in the last 12 years because my senior pastor recruited them. Now, I equipped them, I trained them, I connected them with a coach, I oversaw the small group ministry, I met with my leadership team, but I didn't recruit leaders anymore. So now you might be thinking, well, that would be great if my senior pastor was the small group champion, but how do I get my senior pastor to champion small groups? Well, first thing you can do is to put your pastor on the curriculum. Put your pastor on the curriculum. Because if you put your pastor on the curriculum, your pastor will instantly be more interested in small groups. So the church I was telling you a little bit before, Van Dyke Church down in the Tampa area, we went down, we worked with their team, we shot video on a Monday. Tuesday morning, we're in the pastor's office. And the senior pastor says, so we've shot this video, we're creating this curriculum now. How are we going to recruit leaders? How are we going to get people connected into groups? And their discipleship pastor came to me later in the day, and he said, I've been trying to get my pastor interested in groups for 2 years. He said, and you just did it. And of course, I just smiled and said, well, I'm Alan White. No, that's actually not what I said. But what happened was, because the pastor made the investment of recording his teaching on video that was being developed into the small group study, because the pastor made that investment, he had a much higher interest in the success of small groups in his church, because he didn't want to see the project that he was part of go to waste or not be used effectively or anything else. But here's the other side of it. If your pastor's on the curriculum, your people will be more interested in connecting in groups and doing the study. Because let's think about this. If your people are not connected to each other than Jesus Christ, the reason that people attend your church, other than Jesus, is because of your senior pastor. They like his personality, they like his style, they laugh at his jokes, and so they're there because they connect with your senior pastor. Now, let me caution you here. Don't mention this to your worship pastor, because it'll break his heart. But the senior pastor is the guy. So when senior pastor stands up and said, we prepared these materials based on my teaching, well, you're already giving your people more of what they want, and then your pastor says, would you get together with your friends, or would you open up your home and have one of these groups? Then they're going to follow his leadership, because they're very interested in his teaching, and they're certainly going to engage with his leadership. Now, you don't need to hire a company and spend tens of thousands of dollars to develop curriculum. If you find somebody that can run a camera, somebody that can do video editing. I had one church up in Washington State that their videographer was the pastor's 15-year-old son. Somebody who can write and write questions, and maybe that's you, maybe that's developing a team in your congregation, someone who can do photography, someone who does graphic design, and then somebody that could project manage. I've had surveys where I've asked people, do you have interest or ability in these areas? And if they indicated they did, then we just asked them to show us a sample of their work, because if they do video, they have a YouTube channel. If they write, they probably have a blog. If they're a photographer or a graphic designer, they probably, they have a portfolio out there somewhere. And if they're a project manager, they have a list of projects they've either done professionally or on a volunteer basis. And so you qualify whether or not they're actually good at it, because just because you like doing it doesn't mean that you should. Just because you like singing doesn't necessarily mean that you should be on the worship team, right? And so once you've found these roles, and have them commit to one project and see what it's like to work with them. And if a project turns out well and they were good to work with and things came in on time, things were done well, you invite them on to more. If it didn't work out so well, then you thank them for your time, you thank them for fulfilling their commitment, and you don't invite them back for another project. Now, this may seem daunting, but here's the thing. 5 years ago, I met a pastor that this is his church, Dallas Baptist Church in Dallas, Pennsylvania. Whoever knew there was a Dallas, Pennsylvania? It's a church of 50 adults. They produce their own curriculum entirely with a volunteer team. The pastor on a Sunday morning went through just what I did about the different roles of developing curriculum. And he said hands started going up, and he was just surprised. I mean, the pastor is the only employee at this church. And they produced curriculum. When they launched their groups, they ended up with 100 people in groups. They actually became a church of 70 people at that point. They had 3 groups that met in prison. Then they turned around and did a second curriculum. And I know what you're probably thinking. What kind of a curriculum could a church of 50 people possibly produce? This is their curriculum. It's not a great photo. This is my personal copy of their curriculum, and I took the picture, so I'm not a great photographer. But they produced a curriculum that's as good as any Christian publisher, anything that you would find online or in a Bible bookstore. And they did a tremendous job. The other way to get senior pastors interested, in addition to curriculum, is also to begin to think about, what does your senior pastor worry about? What is your senior pastor concerned about? See, senior pastors are concerned about things like attendance, spiritual growth, closing the back door of the church, outreach, and finances. These are the kinds of things that would keep a senior pastor up at night. And I could tell you a bunch of stories about how small groups can meet all of these needs, but instead I'm going to give you research. So a couple of books, a recent book by Ed Stetzer and Eric Geiger called Transformational Groups, and then an older book by Robert Wuthnow called Sharing the Journey. They both are based on research, and they both show some very close similarities as far as the effectiveness of groups. And this is what they say, is that these studies have shown that groups will increase connection, and this answers the assimilation issue. Especially if you have a lot of people that are new to the area, you're in a college town, you're near a military base, people are moving in because of industries or what have you. You need to help solve an assimilation problem, and groups will help you do that. They're going to increase spiritual growth, and this addresses the discipleship issue. I think we all know that. It'll also increase attendance, because if you're doing a small group study that goes alongside a sermon series that your pastor is teaching on the weekend, people will tend to attend more often. That's hard to say that 3 times fast. But they'll be in church more often because they know that what the pastor talks about on Sunday is connected to what they'll be studying in the group. And then the other thing, and I'd like to say that I was smart enough that I figured this out, but I didn't. It just happened, and now I'll take credit for it. But when we did our very first curriculum on the Passion of the Christ, our pastor was on camera. People went out in the community. They invited a lot of people that had never darkened the door of our church. And then when the people were invited to church, they felt like they already knew our pastor because they had spent 6 weeks in the comfort of their friend's living room, or 6 weeks at a coffee shop or a break room at work or whatever. And in that time, they got to know our pastor and his teaching on the video. So when they were invited to come to church, it wasn't like a foreign experience to them, because they felt like they already had a connection to our pastor. People in groups tend to serve more than people who are not in groups. And people who are in groups tend to give more. And I think that in the transformational groups, they actually say how much, but I can't remember right now. But anyway, it does meet these needs. We're working with a church in the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area last year, and they did 2 series, one in the new year and one after Easter. And it was the only new thing that they had introduced. And when they compared their numbers for 2015 with the same first 6 months of 2014, what they discovered was their attendance had increased by 7.5%, and their giving had increased by 7%. And the only thing they did different in 2015 than 2014 was to do these 2 church-wide series with their pastors teaching on the video. And I mean, you figure, just doing the simple math, if your church has a $1 million budget, we'll start there, and you have an increase of 7%, that's $70,000. And they actually used the money to expand. They were starting another campus, and they used the funds to help start the campus. I might have convinced them that maybe they needed to give the small group pastor, small group director a raise, because it came from groups. But anyway, all right. So this is Pastor Troy Jones at New Life Center in Renton, Washington, Great Assemblies of God Church. They're a congregation of about 2,500 adults. They had 100 groups when we started working with them. Produced curriculum for them, then they produced one of their own. We added some new strategies, and they added 400 new groups. So this church of 2,500 now has 500 groups, and they're in Washington State, which last I checked the map is not in the Bible Belt. And the pastor saw the potential of reaching out to the community through groups by creating curriculum that they've actually made it a goal to have 1,000 groups in their church, which is a church of 2,500. I worked with Chip Ingram last year at Venture Christian Church out in Silicon Valley, and there are about 2,200 adults on the weekend, and launched 400 groups based on his Holy Ambition book and small group curriculum. And what's really cool for me is that, I was very blessed by pastors that would engage. I was very blessed by how God, helped form groups, helped to bring me to these ideas. But what's really cool for me is churches that I'm coaching now, my ceiling is their floor. And that has been such a cool thing to see. A church of 4,000 in Tacoma, Washington, pastor stood up on a Sunday morning and invited people to do the study they had created with their friends. And he recruited 1,200 leaders in the day. And I'm almost getting teary talking about this stuff. Lutheran Church of Atonement in Barrington, Illinois. It's a church of 300 adults, and they started out with a three-part series they called the Year of Transformation. And when they kicked this off in the fall 2 years ago, they distributed 580 copies of their study guide. The coolest thing about this is, between the first study, it was in the fall, the second study that started in January, they only lost one group, but the overall participation in groups had increased by other groups adding members to them, and they only lost one group. So it wasn't this, you could doing something for 6 weeks is very, very easy, but keeping it going is another question. Well, now they're doing a second year and doing curriculum on their own, and it's very exciting to see kind of where they've gone with this. St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Orlando, Florida, this is Father Charlie Holt. When I first met him a decade ago, he had 260 adults, and they were doing 40 Days of Purpose. We all were. And this church of 260 adults started 75 groups for the 40 Days of Purpose. And now he's created his own three-part series, again, not in a terribly large church, and he's had over 100 other churches participate in the series that he can produce. So I hope you've gotten some things out of this. I have something else I want to share, and let's sum this one up. Your senior pastor is the leader. So let your senior pastor take the lead in recruiting group leaders and in being the champion in your church. So how can I help your church? Let me just share this with you. If you stick with me to the end, I'm going to give you 30 minutes of my time to talk about anything that you want to talk about related to groups. And so right afterward, I'll email you a link. It's a little tool I use called Meet Me. It'll show you my calendar, and then you can select the 30-minute time. And the 30 minutes is not going to be a sales pitch or anything. It's going to be actually answering practical questions that you have about your groups. But here's what I'd like to offer you. I've been doing coaching with groups for a long time, with churches for a long time. And this last year, I've started a couple 12-month groups, and have found that I'm not giving people enough personal attention. So I went to 6-month groups where I'm giving churches individual calls in addition to group calls, and it's a lot less money. And so this has kind of been a more popular option. But let me tell you what's involved in the 6-month group. And like I said, if you stick to the end, I'll give you the 30 minutes of my time. If this is something you're interested in, we can certainly talk about that. If this is not something you're interested in or something you can do right now, I completely understand. But what we'll cover in the 6-month group is what series to use in the fall, how to develop your coaching structure, how to recruit new group leaders, how to form groups that will last, not just 6-week groups, but long-term groups, what to measure, what to monitor in your groups, how to sustain your groups from the fall into the new year, training and coaching to reach your goals. So it's not just a matter of, me spending an hour like this just talking at you, but a matter of, for each church to set, what are your goals for the fall? What are your goals for the next 12 months? How many people do you want to see connected into groups? How many groups do you want to start? And we'll start with your goals and then customize a plan to help you reach your goals. Would have the strategies and experience for your fall launch to succeed. We would meet twice a month as a group over a GoToMeeting where we'd actually see each other and talk to each other. You would be given some homework between classes. Like I said, it's not lecture-based. So Let's say we're going to talk about how to effectively recruit leaders, and so you would be given either a chapter of my book manuscript or one of my, one session of an online course that you would view between meetings, and then when we get together, we would talk about what would work, what wouldn't work, what obstacles you might be facing, how to make that happen in your church or some modified version of that. We would also have monthly one-on-one meetings, and that's something that I'm missing with my 12-month groups because we only meet once a quarter, and I feel like I'm not engaged enough with them and what's going on in their specific church. So with a 6-month group, we would have an individual meeting every month in addition to the two group meetings. You would also receive a customized timeline for your fall launch. So it would tell you everything that you would need to do, starting next month all the way through to the end of your fall launch and then planning into your new year, what you would need to do from week to week in order to make that happen. We would also have the space to talk about groups. I mean, I joined a coaching program years ago, and one of the things I found was that just to get together with other people who are passionate about small groups and just to have that regular time where we could talk about groups, while the other members of our church staff, appreciated groups, their heart didn't beat for groups like mine did. And so to get with other people that were as excited about groups as I was a real boost to me and really helped me out as far as keeping focused. The coaching and encouragement to drive your success, lifetime access to the group meetings, the recordings. So we record the meetings, have them in a Dropbox that would be available only to the people that are in the group. You would have early access to my book. So before it's published, I would just provide you, chapter by chapter of the manuscript. My publisher hasn't told me to stop doing it, but then I didn't ask, so oh well. The coaching group is going to start in June, actually on June the 22nd, it's a Wednesday, and go through December. And so it'll help you to plan all of the steps leading up to your launch, whether you develop your own curriculum or not, and then also then how to add to your coaching structure or start your coaching structure, how to recruit leaders, how to form groups, how to train them, how to do the things that they're going to need to get started, but also how to do the things that are going to help your group to continue. You'll be coached through all stages of your fall 2016 group launch. We'll plan your New Year 2017 follow-up series, which may be another church-wide series. It may not be. There's different ways of doing that. So some deliverables and bonuses. If you're looking for a database, I have a relationship with churchteams.com. And if you're interested in church teams, want to sign up, I can actually have them waive the setup fee, which is equal to the first year's of the database. It's not a requirement, but if you're looking for a database, it's a pretty good deal. In addition, I am developing online courses. I would give you lifetime access to my online courses. I'm doing about 6 of those a year. Also monthly one-on-one consultations with me, like I said, just talking about your church. And so the total of these bonuses is just over $2,000. So now when I know what you're thinking, how much is this going to cost? Well, I have coached individual churches for 12 months at a time, and those churches have paid anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a month. And this doesn't even approach that kind of money. So how much does it cost? I have 3 options. The first option is a 6-month coaching group with your monthly one-on-one calls, and that option goes for $1,497 for the 6 months. And like I've said, I've had people pay well more than that per month for 12 months for coaching. The second option would be the 6-month coaching group like I just described, plus an on-site consultation with your team, and that is $3,997. I just did this with a church yesterday up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the travel's included in that price. So it's not like I'm going to send you an invoice for my hotel and my rental car and stuff, my airplane ticket afterward. It would all be included. If you want to spend a day with me, and we would do some other things leading up to that. And then the third option would be individual coaching. And so we would do this, cover the same things we would cover in the group, but all of it would just be with me and you. And so for the 6 months, it's $11,997. It includes the on-site, it includes the travel expenses. Within the continental U.S., I had to start putting it on there because the first time I introduced this coaching group, I had a church from Poland, I had a church from South Africa, and I thought, Okay, I can't include the travel costs in that. But anyway, those are the three options. So let's say you take the first option, which is the 6-month coaching group plus the one-on-ones, and maybe you take me up on the church team's offer. That's going to vary depending on the size of the church. The online courses would be included, the one-on-ones, and so what I'm giving you just in that, and with even outside of the group meetings, is worth more than the $1,500 that you would be paying. If you get into this and you don't like it, it's not your thing, it's not what you thought it was going to be, it's not what you need, within the first 30 days, I will give you 100% of your money back. Now, I will tell you this, and this is not to set you up. If you truly were in that scenario, I would give you your money back. I am working with 21 churches right now, and nobody's asked for their money back yet. So anyway, FYI. All right, and then also there's an additional bonus. If you decide, okay, this is something we want our church to do, if in the next 7 days you decide, between now and the 25th, this is what you want to do, then I will give you an online church assessment. And this is where we would send some surveys to your congregation, to your current group leaders, maybe to your church staff, collect some data, and then we would meet for an additional one-on-one where I would share the results of this. This is something that when I travel to a church and do this, they pay me $2,500. And so I will add this to your 6-month coaching group if you decide in the next 7 days that this is something you're interested in. And then you would have the early bonuses. So all of that put together, all I'm trying to show you here is that I'm giving you about double the value of what I'm asking for the 6-month coaching group. And this isn't a fire sale. It's not, this isn't like a market. I'm not a salesman. I'm a pastor. The reason I'm doing this is because I know how somebody else coaching me impacted me personally and impacted my church's small group ministry. And the other side of it is I am a one-man band. I don't have an assistant. I don't have a staff. I don't have a lot of overhead. And my office is a back bedroom in a 60-year-old house. Not my house. I actually rent it. But I don't have to charge $2,000 to $5,000 a month to coach people. And I just enjoy working with pastors and churches. So that's why I want to keep the price down and make this available to as many people as I possibly can. So if you're interested, my email address is there. My cell phone number is there. If you want to talk. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and open this up for some questions, and whether it's questions about the coaching group or whether it's questions about something that I went over too quickly during the webinar, I'll stay on. I've got until 5 o'clock Eastern and I have to head out, but I'll stay on as long as you guys want to and answer any questions that you might have.